Throughout the annals of history, humanity's capacity for cruelty has repeatedly demonstrated an unsettling lack of boundaries. The evolution of executions, once simplistic acts of justice, gradually transformed into grotesque public spectacles, designed not just to punish the guilty, but to instill fear and assert dominance over the living. The narratives that unfold in this account are not mere chronicles of death. They are harrowing records of human anguish so profound that witnesses often succumbed to their psychological weight, collapsing in horror, retching, or bearing the trauma to their final resting places. What follows is an exploration of 8 deaths that redefine the extremes of human cruelty, where justice blurred into sadism. The echoes of the condemned's tormented cries reverberated through history itself. In the medieval and early modern eras, the act of execution served dual roles. It was a means of punishment and a captivating spectacle. These public killings were multifaceted in purpose. They affirmed the absolute authority of monarchs and the state, satiated the public's craving for macabre entertainment, and sent stark warnings to any who dared to entertain thoughts of rebellion, heresy, or treason. Some executions, however, transcended their intended purposes, transforming into enduring monuments of human suffering that appalled even the most jaded observers. The techniques employed were anything but merciful. They were calculated for maximum agony, strategic visibility, and a profound psychological impact on all assembled. Take, for instance, the fateful day of November 24, 1326, in London, where crowds filled the streets. Faces contorted with an unsettling mix of anticipation and revulsion. Hugh Despenser the Younger, once the second most powerful man in England, beneath King Edward II, was dragged through mud-strewn avenues, clad in a tunic inscribed with biblical verses, mocking his notorious acts. Having amassed wealth and influence through manipulation, extortion, and his intimate ties to the king, Despenser emerged as one of the realm's most reviled figures. His downfall came about not through the law, but through vengeance when Queen Isabella and her lover Roger Mortimer deposed Edward II. Despenser's execution was methodically orchestrated to maximize his suffering and the crowd's horror. Initially hanged, he was not granted the reprieve of death. The rope was meticulously calculated to bring him to the brink of unconsciousness, never fully releasing him from the agony of life. As he dangled, gasping for breath, the executioner cut him down and commenced the grisly act of castration, resulting in a cacophony of approval from the bloodthirsty throngs as his severed genitals were tossed into a flame. Prepared for this grotesque purpose. This act, symbolic in its cruel irony, punished Despenser for his reputed unnatural influence over the king, rumored to have been of a sexual nature. However, this was merely the beginning of his torment. Still conscious, he was laid upon a table while the executioner deftly made a deep incision into his abdomen. The technique of disembowelment required calculating precision. If the cut was too deep, he would die too swiftly, thus robbing the spectacle of its intent. If too shallow, the process would extend into prolonged agony. The executioner found the perfect depth, pulling Despenser's intestines from his body as he screamed, his vocal cords strained until they too surrendered. Witnesses reported that the stench of open entrails blended with the smell of burning flesh, an odor so overpowering that many members of the crowd began to retch uncontrollably. Some victims of this horror fainted. Others fled, but the majority remained, mesmerized by the unfolding nightmare. The entire ordeal spanned hours as Despenser's organs were methodically removed, each piece cast into the fire before his horrifying gaze. Historical accounts suggest he lingered in consciousness for an unfathomable amount of time, battling against the inexorable grip of death as his body was methodically dismantled. Ultimate mercy, or perhaps sheer exhaustion, on the part of the executioner, came in the form of a fatal stroke that removed Despenser's heart, which was then displayed to the audience before his nearly lifeless body received a beheading. His severed head was displayed on a pike at London Bridge, while his dismembered body was divided, and sent to 4 cities as stark warning to all who dared defy the authority of the crown. The crowd dispersed in an unusual silence, many visibly shaken by the monstrous spectacle they had witnessed. What rendered Despenser's execution particularly harrowing was not just the physical torment, but the psychological warfare inflicted upon him. He was starved for days prior to his execution, ensuring his frail body remained conscious throughout the ordeal. Forced to witness the consumption of his own body, he was subjected to the executioner's taunts, who described each gruesome step before it unfolded. Even seasoned observers noted that Dispenser's execution crossed a line, revealing more about the executioner's depravity than anything else. The implications of Dispenser's agonizing death reverberated through English history, establishing a grim precedent for the execution of traitors, a pattern later repeated for centuries, most famously in the case of Guy Fawkes and the Gunpowder Plot conspirators nearly 300 years later. This punishment became known as hanged, drawn, and quartered, a sterile phrase that could never encapsulate the sheer horror of the experience. It underscored a fundamental truth about public executions. They were not designed for reform or deterrence, but to fulfill society's bloodlust for vengeance, while showcasing the state's capability to inflict unimaginable suffering on those who dared to challenge its authority. In contrast, during China's Qing dynasty, a different but equally horrific array of punishments existed, meticulously calibrated to the severity of the crime and the social standing of the perpetrator. For the most egregious offenses, parricide, matricide, treason, or mass murder, there prevailed a method of execution so terrifying that its mere name prompted hardened criminals to confess to lesser crimes. Linki, or death by 1,000 cuts, was not just a method of execution, but a ritualistic dismantling of the human form intended to prolong suffering over days. Fu Li, convicted of brutally murdering his family in the late 19th century, was sentenced to this most extreme form of punishment. His torment began 3 days before his execution with a period of public humiliation. Paraded through the streets in a wooden collar and sporting placards that detailed his crimes, he was subjected to the derision and spitting of bystanders. This prelude served to dehumanize him, rendering his upcoming torture more palatable for witnesses. On the day of his execution, Fu was tied to a wooden pole in the center of a public square. His limbs secured so tightly that he could not move a muscle. Executioner, a specialist in the gruesome art of Linki, commenced his work with the precision of a surgeon. The initial cuts were shallow, yet strategic, designed to inflict maximum pain while sparing vital organs and major blood vessels from immediate damage. The removal of small pieces of flesh from Fu's limbs progressed methodically, each incision calculated to prolong consciousness and suffering. In scrutinizing historical instances of extreme punishment, it becomes evident that those tales offer chilling insights into a universal human capacity for cruelty executed under the guise of justice, a capacity that transcends cultures and echoes throughout time. The mournful echoes of those who faced brutal, torturous deaths remind us that humanity possesses not merely a penchant for violence, but a deeply ingrained ability to rationalize and institutionalize it with alarming precision. Each horrific execution stands as a reminder of the darkest aspects of human nature, encoded in the very fabric of history's narrative. Let's always remember the past, however disturbing it might be, so that we never allow the echoes of cruelty to resound in our own time. Witnesses who were fortunate or unfortunate enough to witness the Linki executions reported that the screams of the victim were unlike any human sound they had ever encountered. Raw and animalistic, the agonized cries seemed to assault the very senses, robbing the person of their humanity and reducing them to pure, unadulterated suffering. The punishment followed a strict ritual designed around hundreds of cuts made to various regions of the body. Limbs were the first to bear the knife, followed by the chest, back, face, and finally, the genitals. Each cut was deliberate, with the executioner occasionally pausing to allow the condemned to briefly recover, delaying shock from cutting the performance short. In some instances, opium was even offered not as an act of mercy, but to prolong consciousness and heighten the suffering. Fu Li's execution lasted approximately 2 days, though the exact duration is hard to confirm. Disturbing photographs of such executions exist, controversial enough to remain largely absent from academic discourse due to their graphic nature. What made Linki particularly devastating psychologically and emotionally for both the victim and the onlookers was not merely the cruelty of the act, but its bureaucratic precision. This was not a mob's blind rage or a capricious beheading. This was a state-sanctioned atrocity performed in accordance with strict guidelines. The number of cuts was dictated by law based on the nature of the crime. This transformation of torture into bureaucratic procedure lent a unique horror to the spectacle that Western witnesses found difficult to comprehend. Crowds that gathered to observe Fu's execution displayed a wide spectrum of human reactions. Some viewed it with grim satisfaction, convinced that his barbaric actions against his family justified the punishment. Others, horrified and unable to bear the sight, turned away. Many reported long-lasting nightmares, haunted by the memory of Fu's agonizing screams and the sight of his body, once a man gradually rendered unrecognizable. Foreign observers noted that even the most seasoned executioners appeared psychologically affected by the execution, carrying out their grim tasks with a detachment that seemingly masked deeper, unresolved trauma. Linky was officially abolished in China in 1905 as part of sweeping legal reforms aimed at modernizing the judicial system and improving the country's international standing. However, the scars left by previous executions, including that of Fu Li, eternally mark the historical record. They reveal how even well-organized states can systematically implement cruelty, turning torture into an exact science governed by rules and procedures. Clinical nature of Linky made it arguably more disturbing than acts of spontaneous violence, manifestation of suffering deliberately designed to unfold in a methodical fashion. The psychological repercussions of witnessing such an execution extended far beyond the moment of horror. Western missionaries and diplomats who documented these atrocity-laden events heavily influenced European and American perceptions of Chinese culture for generations, contributing to unfounded stereotypes regarding Oriental cruelty. Ironically, many such critics neglected to acknowledge their own nations' histories of equally severe punishments, such as breaking on the wheel, burning at the stake, or drawing and quartering, which were equally orchestrated to maximize suffering. Linky epitomized not a uniquely Chinese cruelty, but a universal human tendency to rationalize extreme violence against those perceived to have transgressed societal norms. Fu Li's horrific death served as both punishment and a cautionary tale, chilling reminder that the authority of the state extends beyond merely the power to kill. It encompasses the ability to transform death itself into an excruciating ordeal from which there is no escape. Shifting the focus to England in 1531, one finds another glaring example of the era's brutal judicial processes. In the dangerous court of King Henry VIII, accusations of poisoning could result in a death so horrifying that the legal framework allowing for such punishment would be repealed. Within the lifetime of those who witnessed its depths, Richard Rose, a cook in the service of the Bishop of Rochester, had enjoyed a reputation for competence and loyalty until February of that year, when he prepared a large pot of porridge for the bishop and his guests. In a shocking turn of events, 17 people fell gravely ill after consuming the food, with 2 succumbing to painful deaths, marked by violent convulsions and relentless vomiting. Without hesitation, Rose was arrested and charged with high treason, an unusual and severe classification that revealed the deep paranoia surrounding the court regarding assassination by poison. The evidence against him remains murky to this day. Some historical records suggest he confessed to introducing a toxic substance into the porridge, claiming it was merely a prank intended to induce mild illness rather than death. Other accounts maintain he steadfastly defended his innocence, alleging that unknown parties had tampered with the food to implicate him. Regardless of the truth, once King Henry VIII took personal interest in the case, the outcome was predetermined. Fearing assassination attempts on nobility, King pressured Parliament to pass the Act for Poisoning, which decreed murder by poison to be high treason, punishable by death by boiling. The horrific sentence was carried out on April 5, 1531, at Smithfield, London's primary execution ground. A sizable crowd gathered, lured by morbid curiosity, surrounding this newly concocted method of execution. An enormous iron cauldron stood prominently in the center of the square, suspended over a growing fire of wood and kindling. As Richard Rose was escorted to the execution site, the sheer terror evident in his demeanor was so profound that he needed to be carried, his legs having completely given out and rendered impotent by fear. Executioners prepped the cauldron, filling it with water and igniting the fire, permitting the audience to witness the temperature steadily rise. Boiling was an execution not designed for swift demise, as many methods tend to permit. Instead, it unfolded agonizingly slowly, allowing spectators to bear witness to every anguished moment. As the water steam-soaked the air, Rose was thrust into the cauldron. Competing accounts suggest he was submerged in relatively cool water that was subsequently heated, while others assert he was placed directly into already boiling liquid. Whatever the truth, the outcome remained unchanged, an unimaginable level of agony as his skin blistered and peeled, cooking away while he remained conscious and screaming. Witnesses reported scenes of unfathomable horror. The smell of cooking human flesh, likened to pork, but with a distinctly sickly sweet odor, permeated the vicinity, resulting in widespread nausea amongst onlookers. Individuals accustomed to the butchery of animals and previous public executions found themselves violently ill or sprinting from the scene. Initially, Rose's screams were loud and agonized, but grew weaker and less coherent as steam inhalation and severe injuries began ravaging his throat and lungs. The torment lasted around 2 hours before he finally succumbed to his horrific fate, although accounts of the exact timeline vary. What made Rose's execution particularly contentious among even those familiar with brutal public punishments was a sense that his suffering exceeded any reasonable expectation of proportional justice. While poisoning was indeed frowned upon as a cowardly and vile act, many felt the public spectacle of boiling a man alive crossed an unforgivable line into the realm of pure sadism. The fact that Richard Rose may have been innocent, or at worst guilty of nothing more vicious than a poorly conceived prank gone horrifically awry, invoked outrage. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to support our work and never miss an upload. Like this video, drop a comment, and share it.